All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today at our first event celebrating Native American Heritage Month. We will be kicking off our celebrations with Carrie Cannon and For the Love of Turquoise. Carrie is a member of the Kiowa tribe of Oklahoma and is also an Oglala Lakota descent. She has a BS in wildlife biology and an MS in resource management. She began working for the Hualapai tribe of Peach Springs, Arizona in 2005, where she began the creation of integrational ethnobotanical program for the Hualapai community. She administers a number of projects promoting the intergenerational teaching of Hualapai ethnobotanical knowledge, working towards preservation and revitalization to ensure tribal knowledge persists as a living practice and tradition. Just some housekeeping rules. Please practice kindness. Follow our community guidelines for engaging with others. Please engage with us. Feel free to comment any questions you might have. And towards the end of the event, we will host a Q&A session. And students, for attendance, please stay till the end. We will attach an attendance link to the chat where you'll be able to click to. And lastly, we would like to share our land acknowledgement. Before we start, we would like to state that Maricopa Community Colleges and Chandler-Gilbert Community College believe that it is important to remember and acknowledge our campuses are located on ancestral lands and within the boundaries of many Arizona's tribal nations. Maricopa's United Tribal Employee Council is working with the local communities, and we are in the process of co-crafting our college's formal Indigenous land acknowledgement. Without further ado, please help me welcome Carrie Cannon.
Thank you. I must have hit the wrong button here. Are you able to see the slideshow?
No, but go ahead and try again. You should be able to present now.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, there we go. All righty. Well, thank you for the introduction. I just want to thank Maria and Donna for facilitating and organizing this event this evening, and all of you for showing up and being involved. I'll just share a little bit about the mission of the Arizona Humanities, who I believe is the co-sponsor for this event. Their mission is to build a just and civil society by creating opportunities to explore our shared human experiences through discussion, learning, and reflection. You can learn more about Arizona Humanities through their website. They are also a 501c3 nonprofit organization and the Arizona affiliate of the National Endowment of the Humanities. And you can find them online through their website, Facebook, Twitter, as well as Instagram. I'll just go ahead and introduce myself a little bit before I launch into our topic this evening. A little bit of background about myself. As Maria mentioned, I'm actually an ethnobotanist with the Hualapai Indian tribe up in northern Arizona, up on the Grand Canyon. And so what that entails is I work on preserving tribal plant knowledge. And on my family heritage, these are family photos. This photo in the upper right, this is my mother's side, and she's of German ancestry, and so those are my great-grandparents in Germany, and they're standing inside a greenhouse. They eventually immigrated to the US, to Portland, Oregon, and continued the tradition of rearing plants. And so my grandfather, who's the little boy in the slide, carried on that tradition and grew up, selling plants as his livelihood. And then on my father's side, I'm of both Kiowa and Oglala Lakota ancestry, and so these are my Sioux relatives, and these are my Kiowa great-great-grandparents, and this is Spotted Wing, and she was a plant medicine person, so she knew all the healing plants for the Kiowa people. So it's no wonder I ended up, let's see. Something on the screen says something about annotation. Should I hit approve or?
No.
No, don't approve that.
Oh, should I just close it?
Yeah. It was an
Sorry
accident
about
by
that.
somebody. Just ignore that.
Oh, okay,
That's a
okay.
new one.
So just, I'm happy to be, working in the field that I am, which is working with plant knowledge, tribal plant knowledge. And so I sort of have a little bit of that in my ancestral background. So you might wonder, how does turquoise play into this whole thing? And a few years back, I was spending all my free money or all of my free time buying Indian jewelry, turquoise, with the money I had earned from my job. And a good friend of mine said, I bet if you learned how to make it, you would save so much money. And so I enrolled in a silversmithing class. And our first project, we had to make a pendant. And so I went to the Kingman turquoise mine and I walked in there, and I can honestly say I had a very life-changing experience, because I just felt a feeling come over me that my life would never be the same, because I was surrounded by all these beautiful rocks, and the spirit moved me. And so I not only did I learn silversmithing, but then I learned lapidary, which is the art of cutting and polishing stones. So now I spend all my money buying turquoise and silver supplies to make it myself. But it sent me down a path in wanting to learn more about turquoise, and that's sort of how this presentation evolved. And again, a little bit about my ancestry. I've always been more aware of my background as a plant person, but as I've begun to reflect about my artistic side, I do have an uncle, the late T.C. Cannon, who was a well-known Kiowa artist. And on my German side, I went to Germany a couple years ago for the first time, and I didn't realize this, but I had this relative, my great-great-grandfather, Ernst von Bondel. He was an artist, and he spent his life building this with a team of other artists, building this memorial, which is a memorial to the German warriors that drove the Roman legions out of Germany eons ago. So there you have it. You have all my background. But now I'm getting over a cold, so excuse me. I'm going to launch into what we're all here to hear about. So I'm going to kind of start from the beginning, and that's how turquoise is formed. So turquoise is a hydrous phosphate of copper and aluminum, which forms as water percolates through cracks in the host rock, picking up trace minerals and depositing them into layers of blue to blue-green stone. So turquoise is most often found in arid regions of the world. It's found on all 6 of the inhabited continents. And usually wherever the right appropriate minerals can be found, which would be phosphorus, copper, and aluminum, and you have water that percolates through the system, turquoise can form. So the water acts as an agent to pick up all those trace minerals, and then it essentially almost precipitates into turquoise. And so depending on what the host rock is, it can be any kind of host rock. It could be igneous, it could be metamorphic, it can be sedimentary. It doesn't matter, but if the right ingredients are there and there's water, turquoise can form. And oftentimes it can form as a surface crust, it can form as a nugget, or it can form as a vein. Most often turquoise is found pretty close to the surface, oftentimes within, right at the surface, or maybe 30 feet deep. It's different than some other minerals where you have to go hard rock mining to find them. An interesting fact about turquoise, which is I just find so shocking, is that actually only 10% of all the turquoise in the world is actually considered gemstone grade quality. So what that means is if you found this in the earth, only 10% of it would be hard enough that you could polish it and it would withstand the grinding wheels and it would polish nicely. The other 90% is what's referred to as chalk. And if you took this to the grinding wheels, it would disintegrate on you. So what people have learned to do over time is to stabilize turquoise. And so when you stabilize it, that's just a way of hardening it with a resin. Then you're able to recover some of that chalk turquoise that otherwise wouldn't have been recovered. So there's also, in addition to stabilized turquoise, there's also something called composite turquoise. This is something that the Kingman mine manufactures. And you can think of it as the difference between particle board versus lumber. So this being lumber, this being particle board. So you take a bunch of small crushed up pieces of turquoise, and if you compress it with pressure and heat and resin, you can create a block. And it is real turquoise, but it's a bunch of pebbles that have been formed into a compressed block. There's also reconstituted turquoise, which is in the process of cutting and shaping stones, there's a lot of waste product, like little like turquoise dust. And so you can accumulate all that dust and you can glue it back together, and you can put in a black dye to create a matrix to make it look more turquoise-like. There's also dyed turquoise. So sometimes turquoise has been dyed different colors to enhance it, or in some cases, like the Kingman mine has dyed some of it purple, and they market it as Mojave purple, but it is actually turquoise that they've just changed and enhanced the color. My least favorite is Imposter Turquoise. This is all over the market. You have to be real careful with this, because sometimes people will be misleading and pretend that it's real turquoise, and when in fact it's not. So sometimes it's plastic. You can tell if it's plastic by taking a hot needle to it, and if it melts, then it is likely plastic. There's also other stones like howlite that are a white stone that have been dyed to resemble turquoise, and then it takes on sort of that similar matrix. A way to try and identify imposter turquoise of that type is if it's a bad dye job. So sometimes, like these ones are beads, so there's a drill hole at the margin of the stone. So if you look at the drill hole and if you see white on the inside, then that's an indicator that it was dyed and that it's not true turquoise. And there's some lookalikes out there. There's Veracite, Criscola, Shattuckite. Sometimes these come in similar veins to turquoise because they have some of the similar ingredients. And one thing I forgot to mention about turquoise is depending on the content, if you have a higher copper content, you end up with a bluer stone. If you have a higher content of, sometimes you get iron or zinc, then you end up with a greener stone. And as far as the hardness of turquoise, so there is a scale of hardness that for minerals, it's called the Mohs scale of hardness. So a diamond would be a number 10, and chalk essentially would be a number 1. So gemstone grade quality turquoise is like a 5 or a 6 on the Mohs scale of hardness. And then now I'm going to talk a little bit about turquoise throughout the different cultures of the world. The oldest known turquoise mines are found in the Sinai Peninsula region of Egypt, dating back to 6000 BC. In Egyptian culture, turquoise is believed to provide protection. It also had an association with the goddess Hathor, who sometimes has been referred to the mistress of turquoise. She was considered also the goddess of music, dance, and motherhood. And she was believed to reside over the desert region where the turquoise was found, and that she protected it. Turquoise has been found on the tombs and on burial objects, presumably to protect the deceased on their journey to the afterlife. So you can see here on Tutankhamun's sarcophagus, you see mostly lapis and gold, but there's a few rows of turquoise here as well. In Chinese culture, turquoise is believed to be symbolic of the circle of life. The oldest known turquoise artifacts date back to the Shang dynasty. And it's believed to be symbolic of the circle of life because a stone can change color even in a person's lifetime, and it interacts with the atmosphere, our skin oils, it oxidizes, and so it may start out blue, and as it ages, it can turn green. And so that was sort of symbolic of how we change through our lifetime. In Persian culture, turquoise is symbolic of the connection between heaven and earth. For that reason, the roofs and ceilings of palaces and mosques have been adorned with turquoise mosaic. In Persian culture, turquoise is believed to protect the wearer. Sometimes the warriors and the soldiers would place a turquoise stone in their turban to protect themselves from evil influence. And oftentimes they would adorn their horse tack with turquoise, and even their weaponry. So this is a Champshare Sword, and these were a unique style of sword for horseback warriors. But you see a lot of these that were adorned with beautiful mosaic of turquoise over the sword sheath. And here, this is a great example of how turquoise oxidizes over time. So this must be a very old piece, because most Persian turquoise is a light robin egg blue, and this piece looks very green, so it has undergone the sands of time. So in Tibetan and Indian culture, turquoise is used on the crown of the first Tibetan king. It has been used as a gift to the gods and by kings to high-level lamas. It's an important element of prayer beads. And in southern Tibet, women wear turquoise in their hair because it's believed that it protects their husbands. So you have to wonder if they're not wearing turquoise, are they mad at their husbands? In European culture, turquoise was brought from Persia via Turkish traders, and it was used. So actually, the name we know for it, turquoise, is the French word for turquoise. It translates to Turkish stone. And so when it came to Europe, they believed that it was coming from the Turkish people. But the Turkish people were just the intermediaries on the Silk Road, and it was really originating out of Persia. So turquoise was used as adornments in a lot of Catholic church ornamentation. And then later it became important as an ornamental stone in secular jewelry after the 14th century, when the church had less of a stranglehold over the people, and they were also allowed to adorn themselves too. In Mesoamerica, you see a lot of turquoise used in Mayan and Aztec culture. The word for turquoise in the Aztec language is chalchiutl, and it was valued in higher esteem than gold and emeralds. The Aztecs believed they learned the art of cutting and processing stones from the god Quetzalcoatl. Chiefs wore turquoise as a mark of distinction. It's been found in the burials of important people, and Mayans and Aztecs crafted beautiful mosaics of turquoise and spiny oyster shell. This piece is interesting. It was there's thousands of pieces of turquoise mosaic that have been put on a piece of hollowed out wood. So this is a lighter piece because it's on the backing is hollowed wood, and it's believed that it was worn like on the chest as an adornment. And the British Museum, I believe, has one or two of these items. And one thought is that when Cortez came over, he was gifted with some of these, and they made their way over to Spain. And from there, they were traded around and ended up in different places. And one of these, it's believed, ended up in Florence, Italy, and it actually was completely dismantled because they wanted to create their own. They wanted to use the turquoise pieces, but they wanted to do it in their own style of jewelry. So they completely dismantled the original piece to create their own pieces. In South America, the earliest known turquoise was associated with the Cupasnique culture after 900 BC. Here's an example of a pectoral that'd be worn on the chest. This is a conch shell with turquoise and chrysocolla beads put into them. And then these tumis are from the Sikan culture, and these are ceremonial knives that were used more in a ceremonial element than in a day-to-day basis because they're gold and turquoise. But and this is from the Sikan culture of Peru. And then moving a little closer to home, I'm going to talk about the pre-contact tribal groups, and then we'll move into the contemporary tribal groups. But the Ancestral Puebloans, sometimes referred to as the Anasazi, the Hohokam, and the Mogollon. So the Mogollon culture, you find them evidence of their time in Southeast Arizona, parts of New Mexico, parts of Texas, and beautiful turquoise pendants, beautiful mosaic work. This is a real interesting piece because it predates when silver was here, so it looks to be like a bracelet or an armlet, but it was essentially it's been made from basketry materials. Oh, oops! Now you know where it came from. So it was made with basketry materials, and then it was lacquered with pinon pitch as a resin, and then the turquoise stones were placed on it. But the Mogollon culture, they were a hunter-gatherer culture, and as time went on, they became more involved in agriculture. So in the 11th century, they were living in pit houses. In the 13th and 14th century, they started to move into more of the ancestral Puebloan style buildings and eventually the cliff dwellings. The Hohokam culture down in the valley in your vicinity here are really well known for their irrigation agriculture, well over 500 miles of canal systems to feed the agricultural system. They were excellent traders. They had networks and trade routes all the way to the Sea of Cortez, down in Baja California, down to the Pacific Ocean. And they utilized a lot of the marine shell life there as part of their jewelry and adornment. And so at the different archaeological sites from Hohokam places, they found at least 62 different species of shell marine life that they were getting from the Sea of Cortez. And then they were adorning it with turquoise. And so this is a distinctive style of Hohokam jewelry that you see. And the oldest known turquoise artifact was believed to be found at a Hohokam site. And this is, I believe, the Snake Town Indian ruin, actually on the Gila River Indian Reservation, but they excavated it and then they reburied it. And then Ancestral Puebloans, spanning the present-day Four Corners region, the Ancestral Puebloan lived in pit houses, grand pueblos, and cliff dwellings. They were a complex network of communities across the Colorado Plateau that held a distinct knowledge of celestial sciences that found form in their architecture. The kiva, a congregational space that was used chiefly for ceremonial purposes, was an integral part of their community structure. And then moving forward, we'll talk about the tribes that are still here today, the Santo Domingo, who refer to themselves actually as the Kawa Pueblo. They're very well known for their mosaic work, their spiny oyster shell, and in particular their hishi jewelry. And so hishi is a form of bead made from shell, and in their language it just means like shell bead, but we call it hishi bead. And you see it like so in this necklace that's strung with turquoise and hishi bead. So the Santo Domingo were also, like Hohokam, excellent traders, and they'd make journeys all the way to the same region, Sea of Cortez and down to the Pacific, and they would get hundreds of pounds of shell fragments, which she has here in this photo here. And you have all these triangular and just angular shell fragments, and then she's using a pump drill and she's drilling holes by hand, one by one, and then he has them all strung up, and he's taking all those angular shell fragments and he's rolling them on the hard stone to create the round beads. So these beads were being made by hand. There's still people today that do it this old style, but it's to a degree a little bit of a somewhat of a dying art. But so sometimes you find old jewelry that maybe is deemed Zuni or Navajo, but oftentimes if it has any hishi bead in it, we know that its true origins are from Santo Domingo, because some of those tribal, like the Navajo and the Zuni and the other tribes, they would trade with the Santo Domingo to get the hishi beads. And so there's always may be a piece of more than one tribe in any particular piece of jewelry. And then over to the Hopi Mesas up there in Arizona here, you've got a lot of use of turquoise, shell, cottonwood, later on a distinctive style of silver jewelry called overlay. But these mosaic pieces are kind of interesting because they actually tell a story. And so it's abalone in the center, which is supposed to be symbolic to water. It's an allusion to water. And then the turquoise mosaic is an allusion to a storeroom full of blue corn, which would be a symbol of abundance. And so in a culture that relies on dry land farming in an arid region, rain and abundant corn crops is a good omen. And so those type of omens or those type of symbolisms find form even in the jewelry. And then moving over to Zuni, there's somewhere around 10,000 enrolled tribal members at Zuni, and about 80% of them are involved in the arts as a form of their livelihood. Of that, 65% specifically in jewelry. So this is a tribe that has just really found a niche in making beautiful artistic pieces, and they're very well known for their cluster work, turquoise jewelry, and their fetish necklaces, and also inlay. And then Navajo, prior to silver being available, the Navajo used a lot of the ghost beads, the cedar beads, and also turquoise. In Navajo culture, they would sometimes place a basket full of turquoise over the eastern doorway to the hogan, and that was believed to protect the home from bad influence. And then also too, in some of the oral stories, for lack of a better word, they had it would be like similar to a goddess, but her name was Changing Woman. And there's many stories about her and she's tied to turquoise. She was believed to come from a home in the West, a turquoise home. And so when young women go through their coming of age ceremony, they adorn themselves in turquoise as a way to pay homage to Changing Woman. And then two, just talk about turquoise in Southwestern mainstream contemporary society, beyond the tribal groups. I just like to show that everybody loves turquoise here. And we do really live in a unique part of the world, because if you think about it, other places, and I've lived in a lot of other places in Native communities, and if you think about like in the Great Lakes region, they have a lot of floral beadwork. In the Great Plains, they have a lot of geometric beadwork, geometric quill work. And then down in Florida, down in Seminole, they have all those beautiful skirts with the ribbon skirts with geometric designs. And so you see all, all this beautiful art and jewelry and adornment. But unless, within those tribal communities, those people, will wear that, but you don't see non-Indians like wearing any of that stuff. But in the Southwest, you see everybody wearing turquoise. It doesn't matter if you're American Indian or what culture you are. So I just like to draw attention to like what a nice and wonderful thing that is, that we can all just love and celebrate and enjoy turquoise. I'll talk a little bit about turquoise in the pre-contact Southwest. Some about the cultural and religious significance of some of the jewelry pieces. So I'll be talking about this spiny oyster shell pendant that she's wearing here. Many early photographs of Indians from other tribes from the region show them wearing strings of Santo Domingo turquoise or shell hishi. In addition to making hishi necklaces and jacquelas for trade, the Santo Domingo developed ceremonial jewelry for their own use. Made from large shells, usually reddish spiny oyster shells acquired by trading with other tribes, the pendants bore geometric mosaic patterns formed from small pieces of turquoise, jet, and shell. Although they were originally made for use in the Pueblo traditional corn dance, similar pendants are made for sale. And then over to the right, we'll talk about this one. Another style of Santo Domingo necklace consists of teardrop-shaped tabs strung on hishi. The tabs were made from bone overlaid in the traditional mosaic style with bits of turquoise, jet, and shell. And then this just shows a few of the pre-contact mines, but there's so many more than this map shows. And so, the tribal people, they had methods of extracting and processing turquoise. We talked about some of them already, about the pump drill for drilling the holes, the rolling of the beads. Stone mauls and antlers have been found all over the Southwest at turquoise deposits. So just about anywhere there's modern turquoise mining, the original folks, the original Europeans that arrived there would find Native American artifacts there, because the tribal people knew where these places were, they knew where the deposits were, and they were harvesting it for their own use. And then I like to kind of question whether or not were the tribal people possibly attempting to stabilize turquoise with the resources that they had, and I've been really looking for information on that. And this is not really a smoking gun, but this kind of just talks about how the Apaches, the Plains Apaches, they'd come up onto the plains and they would harvest buffalo, and then they would trade the meat and the tallow and the hides with the Puebloan tribes in exchange for turquoise, corn, and textiles like cotton blankets. So that tallow, they're trading the buffalo bone tallow. In exchange, they're getting turquoise. And so I did come across this excerpt that's a little more to the point. It talks about that Indians making strands of beads learned ages ago that by placing their pieces of turquoise in boiling tallow, sheep fat, they also could have been using bison. For a couple hours, the stone became easier to drill, grind, and polish with less waste. So turquoise is very, very porous. And so in modern times, when they do the stabilization process, they dry the stone out in heated rooms as much as possible before they submerge it in the stabilization solution. But if you're boiling it in the tallow, it's soaking into those pores, and while it may not be acting as effectively as like modern day stabilization solution, perhaps it was having a similar effect and helping harden some of that chalkier turquoise. So let's talk a little bit about turquoise and ancient trade routes. This shows a few more of the turquoise deposits, and then this on the right shows some of the major trade epicenters in the Americas here. And so turquoise has been found as far west as the West Coast, as far north as Canada. It's been traded that far, and as far east as Mississippi and Arkansas. And then just a little bit more on the trading. As early as 600 to 900 AD, ancestors of the present-day Zunis carried bison hides and turquoise to the Pacific coast to exchange for shell, coral, and seawater, a practice that continued well into the 19th century. In 1886, while leading the Hemingway Southwestern Archaeological Expedition, Frank Hamilton Cushing met an elderly Zuni named Kwampasumi who had made, with 2 or 3 companions, a burro journey on foot to the Pacific for the purpose of collecting shell and sacred water there. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a historical timeline and how that sort of plays into turquoise and our region here in the Southwest. So the early colonial influences in our region, came from the Spaniards, and Juan de Oñate came into the area in 1598 and immediately began to subjugate the Puebloan people. And so the tribal people found themselves in a situation of essentially forced servitude, so just maybe one step above slavery. And so they had to work for the Spaniards or else be subjugated. They were subjugated otherwise. And so they had to grow crops for them, and they had to mine for them. And so what ended up happening was the tribal people had had enough, and so they staged a revolt, which is actually the first American Revolution. Happened in 1680. We don't often hear about that one. Anyway, so what happened was Popeye was one of the Puebloan leaders from San Juan Pueblo, and he devised a strategy because the Puebloan tribes, they spoke different languages, and they needed to be able to communicate with one another across a vast region to overthrow the Spaniards. And so he devised a system that he had this string of leather and with a bunch of knots in it. And so all the runners among the different tribes were given these, and they ran it out to all the communities, and they were instructed to untie a knot every day until no knots remained. And then on that final day, that's when they would overthrow the Spanish. And so they were successful in doing that, and they drove the Spanish out of Santa Fe, drove them down to El Paso, and they had their freedom back for about a decade. But then the Spanish came back with a vengeance, and during that time, the tribal people were displaced from not only their livelihoods, but also from access to the turquoise. And then later, you have the other European influences coming from back east. So you have the railroad route west, you have all these early miners and settlers that are coming into the region, and then you have the General Mining Act of 1872, which essentially was just a law that allowed Anglos to just stake a claim to land and access mineral rights. And this was a process that dispossessed tribal people of rights. And so, and then as time goes on, you have turquoise becoming popular back east. You get the tourism trade out west, a lot to do with the railroad. And so it becomes popularized. And so this is just a concrete example of, some of the tribal groups. The Cochiti Four, they were trying to get into the turquoise mine that had been that was, owned by some Anglos, and they got caught. And so they had to do some jail time. And so I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the more well-known turquoise mines. There's probably well over 200 turquoise deposits in the Southwest. We'll just talk about a handful of the more famous ones. One of the really well-known ones is the Cerrillos mine, which is just outside of Santa Fe. And it actually formed at the base of a volcano. And so all that volcanic ash and tuff mixed with the host, rock and minerals, and as water percolate through the system, it just ended up creating a real diversity of turquoise. You get the greens, the browns, the bright blues, another shade of green, blue and green. And so Cerrillos really has some distinctive diversity. And it's considered it's believed to be the oldest North American turquoise mine, and it was strongly utilized by the San Marcos and Santo Domingo Pueblos. And then Morenci turquoise, found in southeast Arizona. This was a large metal mine. It was one of the first turquoise mines to come on the market. It's known for its iron pyrite or fool's gold, which really resembles flecks of silver. And then also you get the bird's eye or water web. So maybe you've heard of the term spiderweb turquoise. That's when you get the black matrix This type of turquoise, you get a dark blue webbing with a light blue turquoise, and that's referred to as a bird's eye or water web. That's highly sought after just for its unique look. In Carlin, Nevada is where you find the number 8 mine. This produced some of the very largest turquoise nuggets in its heyday. It's deep blue and bluish green with black to golden brown matrix. This is some of the most highly collected turquoise in the world. Royston Turquoise, this is a district in Nevada where there's actually 4 mines, not far from Tonopah on Highway 95. Deep greens to rich light blues. You really often find this in a brown matrix. You may have seen turquoise called boulder ribbon turquoise, where it's just a brown matrix with just a vein of turquoise. That's from, a lot of it's from Royston. And this is a little bit of a softer turquoise. It's a 5 or a 6 on the Mohs scale. It's one of the more prolific mines. And then the Sleeping Beauty mine, this one only closed maybe a decade ago. This is located near Globe, Arizona. It's known for its light robin egg blue with little to no matrix. It was favored to be used in Zuni jewelry and one of the largest North American turquoise mines. And so when Zuni jewelry, they do a lot of that cluster work. And so it produces a uniform look. And so you don't really want a lot of matrix because it would detract from that uniformity. So that's why they sought the Sleeping Beauty. Bisbee blue, one of the first on the market. This was part of the Copper Queen mine. A lot of the turquoise has been found in association with copper mines. So where you find copper, you have to find turquoise. This one's known for its high blue stone with chocolate brown matrix. And this is kind of an interesting one because they were after the copper, not the turquoise. And so it was, some turquoise was found in the lavender pit, and some of the guys were smuggling it out in their lunch boxes, which was a no-no. They weren't supposed to do that. But we're so glad that they did, because it made its way out to the world. And then later, some of the waste rock and some of the tailings were recovered, and some of that turquoise was recovered, but only less than 2,000 pounds of the high grade ever was recovered. And it was owned by Phelps Dodge. This is an interesting one, Cherokee Lake. It's named for a mine located on a dry lake bed in a high cool area of Lander County, Nevada, south of Battle Mountain. And it's most famous for its lime green phosphite due to the high zinc content. So some of this turquoise, because it has so much that phosphite and zinc, it just ends up looking like gaspiite. It's just brilliant green. And then also some of it was a lighter blue with some brown webbing. But because it formed on, the turquoise formed on a dry lake bed, there was all these ancient clams in the lake, and those essentially petrified with turquoise. And so you've heard of petrified rocks. Well, sometimes shells petrify, but they petrified into turquoise. And so those are referred to as pseudomorph clams. And I actually saw one, well, I actually got to pick one up, that a turquoise collector had in Sedona. And I think it was like $8,000 if I remember correctly. And I always think about it, when I win the lottery, that'll be something I will add to my collection. The Kingman and Ithaca Peak turquoise, tribal people mined this for over 1,000 years, and contemporary mining began in the 1880s. The mine was part of a boom around 1000 AD when Mayan culture was needing a great supply of it. It's one of the oldest, highest producing mines in the US and has been the biggest supplier of turquoise to the Southwest jewelry industry. It's known for its bright blue nuggets with black matrix, also known for a very wide variety of color and matrix from greens to various shades of blue. So this is the mine that I live very close to. This is one of the very last operational turquoise mines in the US. So right now, most of the turquoise on the market that's available worldwide is coming from China, Tibet, and other regions. And you might wonder, how on earth do they know that tribal people were mining this 1,000 years ago, and that it was important to the Mayans? And so there's been some researchers that have really looked into this, and they've tried to find signature traits of various mines. Like, so certain mines, because of the host rock, might have a certain chemical composition. And so if they can come up with that right formula to know, oh, this particular mine definitely has these elements, then they can compare it to artifacts found far away, and they can be able to match that and say, oh, this, even though this is found down in Mexico, this has its origins up in the Southwest. And then I'm kind of a regular over at the Kingman Turquoise mine. They can't get rid of me, so sometimes they give me a behind the scenes tour. So I'm going to take you guys along. This is the stabilization room. And so, like I had mentioned, this is where they keep the heat on pretty high, and this is a time where they want to dry out all the moisture. Any moisture that's locked in the stone, they want it to be removed. And so this is what most of the turquoise looks like. It's very chalky. If you try to take it to the grinding wheels, it really would crumble. And so after it's been dried, then it's placed in these stabilization buckets where it soaks up the resin for a couple weeks, and then it's allowed a time to cure, and then it's ready. And then so normally when your turquoise is ready, you start cutting it, which is also referred to slabbing. And then cabbing is the process of creating cabochons, rounded gemstones used for jewelry. And these are the grinding wheels used for shaping and forming cabochons. Some people like to back their turquoise. So if you just have a very thin piece and you want to set it in jewelry, sometimes people will back it with an epoxy to raise the stone so that the beautiful part shows, and then the bezel covers this part. And this is just some of the equipment used in the composite turquoise making. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about pre and post contact jewelry styles. And one way to distinguish between that is whether or not they're silver or not. So, you know, before silver was here, that would be the pre-contact style. And then silver came to the market, that'd be the post-contact style because of the influence of the Spanish. So there wasn't any metalworking specifically in the Southwest until the Spanish arrived. But I just want to point out that metallurgy is no stranger to the Americas. Tribal people throughout the Americas had learned to work metal. The Tlingit were well known for cold hammering copper. They made beautiful daggers and ladles and all kinds of useful items. The Mississippian mound culture over there in the Ohio Valley area, also very, very elaborate adornment with copper plates. And then, of course, in the Southwest, just all forms of metallurgy, alloying, smelting, and just magnificent work. But in the Southwest, it wasn't, you know, part of the region until the Spanish influence. And so the very first Navajo that's credited to have learned silversmithing from the Spanish and Mexican influence was a man named Astidisani. And there's no photo of Astidisani, but this is his nephew. And this is the only photo I can use to represent Astidisani. And his nephew is named Slendermaker of Silver. But Astidisani was impacted by the Navajo Long Walk, where the Navajo were displaced from their original land holding and drove out by Kit Carson. And as the Navajo were making their way back, Astidisani made his way over to Zuni. And so he was trying to recuperate some of the wealth that he had lost. And so, but he had learned silversmithing. And so he was very secretive about what he had learned because that was going to be his trade. But then he was befriended by a man named Laniati from Zuni. And Laniati traded him some items. I believe there was like maybe some sheep and a horse or a burro. And then Astidisani taught him silversmithing. And so then Laniati learned how to do it. And so he shared it with his relatives at Zuni. Later, he brought it over to Hopi. Silver working was introduced to the Hopi around 1890 when the Zuni smith Laniati began to trade some of his silver jewelry among the Hopi. He taught Hopi tribal member Sikyatala silversmithing, apparently in return for handwoven native cotton textiles. So, you know, with the introduction of silver, it's just another way to use turquoise and silver together. And so you see silver settings with turquoise. Some of the original silver jewelry was coin jewelry, not only the coin beads, but the tribal people, they had access to currency, silver coins, and so they just started melting down currency. Well, it turns out that's a no-no. The US government apparently doesn't like you to burn up coins. So eventually some of the Indian traders, and when I say Indian traders, I'm talking about Anglo traders that came to reservations and set up trading posts. They began to supply sheet silver to tribal members so that they could produce their jewelry and they wouldn't get in trouble for melting currency. Sand casting and tufa casting. So there's different ways of casting silver pieces. When you do sand casting, you use sand with a high clay content, and you have an existing piece of jewelry, and then you will impress that into your substrate. It will hold that impression, and then you pull your original piece out, and then you pour hot silver in, and you get a new piece. With tufa casting, this is the volcanic ash layers of the geologic layers, and this is a very soft stone, so you can carve into it and pour hot silver in and create an entirely new piece. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about turquoise excavated from Pueblo ruins, caves, and archaeological sites. The knowledge we have of pre-contact jewelry generally comes from excavations. Over the years, archaeologists have found well over 200,000 turquoise pieces at various sites in just Chaco Canyon alone. The gems, which were often embedded into jewelry and figurines, were very important to the Puebloan culture and akin to modern-day diamonds. The largest quantity of turquoise found at any single site was from Pueblo Bonito, a Chaco Canyon great house. One interior room, believed to be used for burials of important people, contained over 56,000 pieces of turquoise. This included 6 carved turquoise birds and a carved jet frog with inlaid turquoise eyes and a collar. One of the most noteworthy objects found within this room was a small cylindrical basket 3 inches wide and 6 inches high, with the exterior completely covered with a turquoise mosaic composed of 1,214 pieces. Found within the basket and nearby were 2,150 disc-shaped turquoise beads and 174 pendants. So in the following slides, I'll show examples of some of the older style turquoise and then some of the more contemporary. So on the left, those are some of those Chaco Canyon beads. On the right, some more contemporary turquoise beads. Some of the older style pendants, and then more contemporary using silver. Necklaces, some of the older style, you see a lot of the tabular necklace. You see turquoise used with shell. Bracelets, before silver, you had like the basketry stems lacquered with the pinon pitch, using shell to do mosaic. I just really like his style, so I have to show some nice bracelets. Earrings, slab earrings, mosaic earrings. You see a lot of the mosaic on the cottonwood slabs or on the shell slabs in Puebloan culture. The word Quito is actually the Navajo word for bow guard. And so these are used to protect the arm when you're using a bow and arrow to hunt, so that when you pull back the string, if it slaps your wrist, it protects your wrist. And so these used to be made from leather and bone, and then when silver came on the scene, they started to combine those. A lot of the Navajo style ones, you'll see patterns of 4, like 4 pieces of silver, 4 pieces of turquoise. In some sense, that is an allusion to the 4 sacred mountains in Navajo culture. So he has more of an older style Quito. He has 2, so he is either ambidextrous or just highly fashionable. Pins, you see that in a lot of the Zuni culture. Collar tips, you see that in a lot of Navajo culture. Bolos, there's different ideas and thoughts on how the bolo came to be. It's more of a contemporary style. One thought is the German tie slide, which you use on over your handkerchief, was a precursor to the bolo. Some say it's actually really bola, and we've just bastardized it and say bolo, but in the Spanish language, it's referring to the lariat. And then another story is in Wickenburg, Arizona, silversmith Victor Cedarstaff claimed to have invented the bolo in 1949. A gust of wind blew off his hat while he was out riding one day. He retrieved the silver trimmed hat band and tossed it around his neck. Cedarstaff patented the invention in 1954. Buckles. This is actually the Lone Ranger when he's in his later years, and he's at a rodeo and he's sporting his turquoise belt buckle. Talk a little bit about concho belts. So most of the concho belts we think of are the contemporary Navajo silver concho belts, and that's usually where people begin the history of concho belts. It's very likely that conchos go much further back in history, and so this is one believed to be a concho belt that I believe was made from gilsonite, which is a type of stone, and this is found in southern Utah over by the Fremont culture. This is a graduated type of concho belt that would have been lashed together with either yucca or agave fiber. And this way predates, the modern day ones that we're all familiar with. And then just a little bit more evidence about that, hey, conchos have been around a long time. even in the Fremont culture, even the clay figurines that have been discovered at archaeological sites, I mean, I don't know about you, but doesn't it look like they're wearing concho belts? I think it kind of does. So just more evidence. Again, this could be a stretch. I will let you all decide for yourself. This pictograph does appear to be wearing potentially a concha belt. So that's also Fremont culture, Southern Utah. So various clues. This is a gypsum disc concha. This may be a concha, this may not be. This one's much smaller. So this could just be a necklace, but this was found over there in Mogollon culture at one of the caves. But also I want to bring up about the Plains influence too, because the Plains in tribal groups had a lot of influence on the Southwest style too. So in a lot of Plains culture, the men would wear the concho as a drop, which means it was like a hairpin, or they'd wear it vertically. It was referred to as a drop. And so this was part of the style. And sometimes you see just the drop, or you see both, the vertical and the drop. I know I'm real familiar with this because in my own Kiowa heritage, the women, we wear our concha belts with the drop. And so there's that has a lot of influence too on the Southwestern styles. But the story everybody else knows usually starts in the 1860s when the Navajo learned the art of silversmithing. They began creating their own concha belts from what they learned from metalsmithing. So what's referred to as the first phase concha belt, the tribal people hadn't learned how to solder on a back buckle yet, because soldering would be an additional technique. So they would cut out a diamond and then they'd leave a piece of metal here, and that way they could lash a horse rein through it and create their belt buckle that way. Later, when you get soldering, you can put the buckle on the back side and it hides the buckle. And so that would be considered second phase concha belts. And then of course you get turquoise in the mix with the concha belts. I just put this slide in here because it just proves that every member of the family should own a concha belt. I'm a firm believer of this. Horse adornments, you see turquoise used in the horse halters and headstalls. I'm going to talk a little bit about the design styles too now. So tabular necklaces, these are some of the older styles and some of the more contemporary tab necklaces. Mosaic, we've seen some of this. Inlay is a form of putting turquoise into silver, and so there's just standard inlay, chip inlay using little chips, channel inlay, cluster work, a lot of Zuni style here. So needlepoint is a distinctive style of cluster work where they're using the elongated pieces of turquoise. Petite point is the teardrop shaped pieces. And then overlay is a style of silver jewelry that kind of evolved collaboratively with the Hopi, and collaboration they did with the Museum of Northern Arizona back around the 1940s. And so you have two pieces of silver, and the top piece with a jeweler's saw, you cut out a design. A lot of these designs have been influenced by basketry and other and pottery designs. And so you cut out the design with your jeweler's saw on the top piece, and then the bottom piece, you sweat solder the two pieces together, and then you form your jewelry, and then you will high polish the top side, and then the bottom side is oxidized, and it creates that two-toned effect. Design motifs. I love this picture. It proves wrong that saying that they always tell us less is more. It doesn't apply to Indian jewelry at all. And so I look at this picture, it gives me inspiration on how to dress. So a jacala, you see these are on the necklaces. It's actually the Navajo word for earrings, and you can see she's wearing her jacalas. So this motif developed because as the day grows long, your earrings start to get heavy, and so you take them off, and then what they do is they throw them over their necklace just like this, and it looked good, and so it evolved into a design motif, but it came out of a pragmatic need to lighten the earlobes. You see it used in men's and women's jewelry. Okay, so the naja, you see it on some of the headstalls. You see it oftentimes used in the squash blossom necklace. And so the Naja is the crescent moon symbol, and most of the literature likes to say that that symbol came from the Spaniards. And you trace it further back in time, it actually comes from the Moors. So when they invaded, there's an Arabic influence. So when they invaded Spain, they had the crescent moon and the star symbol. And so the Spanish picked it up from them. And then the Spanish came to the Americas, and they've got, you know, these Najas on their headstalls. And so as the story goes, the tribal people saw that and then started to, you know, make jewelry with it. But I like to question that. I would say, has it been around longer before the Spaniards? I think that it probably has. And so this is, again, you can choose to believe or not believe. Like this is one example of a pre-contact pendant, which somewhat resembles a Naja. But more evidence here. And all I'm suggesting is that this symbol has been around for much longer than the Spanish arrival. Whether or not it was used in the same jewelry style maybe remains to be known. But so the crescent symbol in association with Zuni pictograph sun watching stations. So essentially a lot of the Puebloan groups would have a sun watching station to monitor where the sun would rise on the horizon. And this was very important for crops and for agriculture. And so usually you find a plateau, a landmark where it's just completely flat, and you can observe the sun rise every morning, and you can track it and figure out what's happening, you know, in the calendar. And so to be able to find a good sun watching station, you need to be positioned in a good location on the land where you find a clear horizon, like a plateau, unobstructed. And so when they would create the sun watching station, they would mark it because it was an important place to be able to go year after year after year, day after day. So they would mark it with these four symbols: the morning star, the sacred hand, the face of the sun, and the new moon petroglyph, which is the Naja, for viewing the morning horizon for tracking a sunrise calendar. So here's one at Chocolate Canyon, one of the sun watching stations. Of course, there's many others throughout the Southwest. So the symbol has been around for a long time, not just the Spanish influence. And then, okay, the squash blossom. This is another one that has been attributed to Spanish influence, and that could be true. That's possible. So some say that it's actually a reference to the pomegranate, not the squash blossom, because the Spanish had pomegranates in their adornments. So I'll just kind of, again, you know, what does it look like to you? Is it a pomegranate? Is it a squash blossom? It could be either. They look quite similar. And stylistically, it's hard to know. Like this one has 6 petals. This one has 5 petals. The silver one has anywhere from 4 to 3 petals. So who knows? But what you hear in the jewelry literature is that some say that the Navajo created the squash blossom after seeing the pomegranate design frequently used as decoration by the Spanish people, including on the buttons of the soldiers' uniforms. In parts of Spain, the pomegranate is a revered fruit, in particular as the heraldic symbol of the city of Granada, which is also the Spanish word for the fruit known in English as pomegranate. This just shows all the different ways of wearing your squash blossoms. Zuni fetish necklaces and Zuni culture is believed that any animal figurine contains a spirit. Original Zuni animal fetish carvings were believed to help the owner in various ways, including with protection, hunting, and to ensure fertility. Zuni fetish carvings have been around for centuries, but only in contemporary times become part of secular jewelry sold at the tourist trade. Also in Zuni jewelry, you see a lot of the inlay, and you see a lot of use of cultural heroes. These are all cultural figures in Zuni folklore, like the Corn Maiden Woman, Eagle Wing Man, Rainbow Man, Knife Wing Man. These all are cultural heroes that have their own stories and traditions, and so they find form in jewelry. Same with Santo Domingo, the Thunderbird necklace, which later was copyrighted by the Fred Harvey Company, and they started to use it in the tourist trade. You see turquoise used with many other items: coral, spiny oyster shell, jet, hishi beads, onyx, abalone. There's many legendary native jewelers. Ray Lovato is one of the famous families from Santo Domingo. After the Santa Fe Indian Market came into fruition, you start getting juried shows, and so you start having people actually signing their jewelry, which becomes sort of a new thing. And then you end up getting collectors like following certain names and certain families. Um, some of the early Indian traders, Fred Harvey Company, Lorenzo Hubble over at Ganado Trading Post. The Harvey Company utilized the railroad route, and they created the Harvey Company, and they had the Harvey girls that would market the jewelry, and they would take people on tours that they called them the Harvey detours, and they'd take them up to the reservation and show them different ways and ceremonies. And this is actually Einstein and his wife. He's wearing a headdress. He's up at Hopi House having a great old time, getting ready to do a tour, a Harvey detour. And then the Hubble Trading Post over there in Ganado. And then collectors, this is Millicent Rogers. She was an oil heiress from back east, and she ended up finding herself out at Taos Pueblo just before, a year or two before she passed away. And she just really fell in love with the native culture and the native jewelry. She was a jewelry maker herself, and she purchased many, many pieces from the region. And her sons, after she passed away, created a museum to honor their mother and also to honor the jewelry traditions of the Southwest and the tribal people. I just like this juxtaposition. I like to joke because she's a rifle hunter and she has her bow guard, so she's a bow hunter. But no, this is just getting back to, there's a lot of native influence, there's a lot of contemporary influence in native jewelry. Mainstream pop culture, everybody loves their turquoise. All the celebrities have it. It's in high fashion these days. And then also a lot of the tribal groups are forming ways to try and preserve their knowledge. Like the Kawa Pueblo has started their own co-op to preserve some of their traditions. In closing, I'll just share some closing thoughts here. Adornments have always held a special place in the soul of humankind. From the beginning of time, people have been fascinated with decorating themselves with beautiful things. Turquoise in particular has held a special significance in cultures around the world. Turquoise has long been used in spiritual rituals and has been found in burial sites worldwide, from the tombs of the Egyptian pharaohs, the Shahs of Persia, to American Indian chiefs and medicine men. I hope this presentation has shed light on the ways in which turquoise seems to touch the human spirit. And with that, I'll turn it over to Maria if there's any questions, or do I need to do anything, hand it back to you?
Nope, you're good. Thank you, Carrie. Does anyone have any questions for Carrie? You can feel free to unmute yourself or you can add them in the chat. No questions?
All righty.
Go ahead, Hannah.
There we go. Sorry. Okay, so you mentioned at one point that only like 10% of turquoise could even be like stabilized and used well in like jewelry and things like that. And I was wondering like more about your like personal opinion as to, do you think the reason why so many cultures gravitated towards turquoise was because of its rarity, was because of its difficulty to work with, or was it more of just some spiritual unique draw to the color and the marbling? Or what do you think? Why do you think it became so important to so many different cultures?
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't given that particular question thought before until now, but so 90% of it is the chalk, and unless you stabilize it, you can't use it. So it's only 10% that is like ready to go. I tend to just think that that blue is just so beautiful. It just captivates people. But it is interesting that worldwide the symbolism seems to be, the common thread seems to like be protection. And so it's hard to say. I mean, because people from thousands of miles away, all around the world, they all, it was sought after, it was believed to be beautiful, but it was also believed to provide protection. And gosh, I really don't have an answer for that, but
no, it's okay. It was more curiosity. Like, what was your vibe, I guess, more from it than anything else?
Yeah, I can just say, you know, when I walked into the Kingman mine that first time, um, I'd never been around so much turquoise in my life, and I've always thought turquoise is beautiful, but you just kind of feel it in your soul, like this came from Mother Earth, this came from a spirit bigger than myself, and it's just beauty from the earth. So it just kind of has that draw, and you know, everybody's got a different affinity, but all the folks that I know that love turquoise, they're just like me, and they just think it's just kind of just beautiful, and you just can't help but appreciate what appreciate creation, and you know what is here, you know, to celebrate.
Great, thank you. And we do have a few comments, not necessarily questions. Very thorough presentation. No questions, just wanted to thank you for your time. Very interesting topic. And we do have there's symbolism in the blue-green color in Mesoamerica.
Okay, does anybody want to share a little more about that?
Yeah, so I am an archaeologist. I teach at Chandler-Gilbert currently as an adjunct. My name is Laura Lloyd. I know I try to put myself up, but I'm totally backlit right now, so you don't get to see me. But so I started out with studying the cultures of Mexico and Central America, and if you trace those cultures. Green and blue are super important. And linguistically, they don't differentiate between green and blue. So it kind of shifts. It's like thinking of, you know, different shades of orange, for example. Like, you know, if a culture is separated between like a light orange and like a darker orange, you know, we might not see that difference. So that's the type of thing with the colors. And so you start off with green being, you know, like a jadeite, like a serpentine, like a dark green being super important. And at some point, it does kind of shift toward turquoise. And as you saw, turquoise can be blue, turquoise can be green. For cultures in Mesoamerica, like the Maya or Teotihuacanos or other cultures, what they did was they had the four cardinal directions, and each cardinal direction has a color connected with it. And you'll also find that that's that type of trait happens in the Southwest as well. Each color for Mesoamerica is a color of corn. So you have red corn, yellow corn, white corn, and blue corn, which they call black. And then the center is the green corn, which is the most important. So the center is vitally important. And so you get, you know, depending on the era, it could be blue, it could be green for our definition, but turquoise is part of that.
It's interesting because the tribe I work for, Wallapai, they also don't distinguish. The word for blue and green is the same, like you had mentioned. So I'm wondering what languages in Meso or in Mexico are you referring to? What tribal languages that also don't
So
distinguish?
it's Maya languages as well as Nahuatl. Very likely, although I'm not a linguist, I would imagine that most Uto-Aztecan languages would not really have that separation. So I don't know if their language is Uto-Aztecan. I mean, that the Uto-Aztecan languages, they spread pretty far into North America. So that would be interesting to check that.
Yeah, Wallapai is a human language. They follow the Colorado River, but it's interesting. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you. Students, just as a heads up, please feel free to fill out the attendance link that I posted in the chat. And if anyone has any more questions? No. Well, thank you, Carrie, for joining us today. What a great presentation. We appreciate it, and everyone have a great night.
All right, thank you guys. Good night.